8-year-old Noah Bennett walked onto the Family Feud stage holding a folded piece of notebook paper in both hands. He waited until Steve Harvey was talking to the adults, then quietly tugged on Steve's jacket and handed him the note. Steve smiled, expecting a child's drawing or a joke. Instead, he unfolded the paper, read 7 handwritten words, and immediately stopped smiling. Noah had written, "Please don't tell my mum, I know she's dying." Steve read it twice. Then he looked at the boy, then at Noah's mother, who was standing only 6 feet away, trying desperately not to cry. Steve slowly put his cards down. He looked toward the producer and said, "We're not doing this episode." The studio fell completely silent. What Steve did next changed the lives of 2 families who had walked onto that stage expecting nothing more than a game. The note was written in blue crayon. It had been folded 4 times. Noah had kept it inside the pocket of his jeans since the family arrived at the studio that morning. Nobody knew it was there. Not his mother, Sarah, not his grandmother, Elaine, not his older sister, Madison, and certainly not Steve Harvey. It was February 21st, 2026, inside the Family Feud studio in Atlanta. The lights were bright, the audience was loud, the families were laughing. Noah stood between his mother and grandmother, swinging one foot back and forth while Steve joked with the contestants. He looked like an ordinary 8-year-old. But every few minutes, he looked at his mother. Sarah smiled at him. Noah smiled back. Then he looked away. His right hand went into his pocket. He touched the folded paper. He had written it the night before. He had written it 3 times before getting the words right. The first version said, "Mum is sick." He tore it up. The second said, "I know something." He tore that one up too. The third version was the one he brought to Family Feud. 7 words. 7 words that would stop the show. Sarah Bennett had been a mother for 19 years. She had raised Noah and Madison alone after her husband died in a car accident when Noah was 3. She worked as a school cafeteria manager, she packed lunches, she attended parent meetings, she remembered birthdays, she kept emergency money inside an envelope above the refrigerator. She had never been wealthy, but her children had never gone to bed wondering whether they were loved. Sarah made sure of that. Then, 8 months earlier, she began having headaches. At first, she blamed stress. Then she started forgetting small things. She forgot Madison's dentist appointment. She put milk in the pantry. She called Noah by his father's name one morning. She laughed it off. "I'm tired." But the headaches became worse. A doctor ordered an MRI. The memory found a tumour. The biopsy came back 2 weeks later. Glioblastoma, an aggressive brain cancer. Sarah was 43. The doctors explained that treatment could slow it. Surgery might help. Radiation might help. Chemotherapy might help. But nobody could promise how much time she had. Sarah asked for the truth. The doctor gave it to her. Possibly a year, maybe less. Sarah went home that evening and sat in her car for 41 minutes before going inside. She didn't want her children to see her crying. When she finally walked through the door, Noah ran toward her. "Mum." Sarah hugged him. He squeezed her tightly. She closed her eyes, and she smiled. "I'm fine." That became the phrase she used every day. "I'm fine." When her hair started falling out, she told Noah she had changed shampoo. When she became too tired to cook, she said she was busy. When she couldn't climb the stairs, she laughed. When she missed work, she said she had a doctor's appointment. When she spent 3 nights in the hospital, she told the children it was just a checkup. Sarah didn't want them to live with fear. She wanted them to have a childhood. But children notice things adults think they hide. Noah noticed his mother's pill bottles. He noticed the hospital bracelets. He noticed the way she held the side of her head. He noticed that she had stopped driving. Most of all, he noticed that adults became quiet whenever he entered a room. One night, Noah woke up at 2:14 a.m. He heard voices downstairs. He walked to the top of the stairs. His grandmother was crying. Sarah was whispering, "I don't want them to know." Noah couldn't hear everything, but he heard one sentence clearly. "I don't know how much time I have." He stood frozen. Then he went back to bed. He didn't ask questions. The next morning, Sarah made pancakes. She smiled. "Morning, baby," Noah looked at her. "Morning, Mum," he wanted to ask. He didn't. Instead, he ate his pancakes. That was the day Noah stopped being able to believe the words "I'm fine." The Family Feud opportunity came 2 months later. Madison suggested they apply. Sarah laughed. "We're not game show people." Grandmother Elaine said, "Why not?" Noah jumped up. "Can we go?" Sarah smiled. "You really want to?" "Yes, why?" Noah shrugged. "Because Steve Harvey is funny." That answer made Sarah laugh. She applied. They were selected. For the first time in months, Sarah had something that wasn't a doctor's appointment on her calendar. A television taping. A family trip. A normal day. She wanted Noah to remember it. On the morning of the taping, Sarah woke up at 5:30. Her head hurt. She took her medication. She sat on the edge of the bed. For several seconds, she couldn't move. Then Noah appeared in the doorway. "You okay?" Sarah smiled. "I'm fine." Noah stared at her. He knew. She didn't know he knew. That was the secret between them. At the studio, Noah was excited. He looked at the lights. He watched the cameras. He whispered questions to his grandmother. "Does Steve really know everybody's answers?" Elaine laughed. "No. Does he know my name?" Probably. Noah looked towards Steve. Then he looked down at the note in his pocket. He had decided something. He was going to give it to Steve. He just didn't know when. The first round began. Steve made everyone laugh. Noah answered a question about candy. He got it wrong. Steve teased him. What kind of 8-year-old doesn't know that? Noah laughed. Sarah laughed. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. Then Noah looked at his mother. She had one hand pressed against her temple. Her smile was still there, but her eyes were closed, only for 2 seconds. Noah reached into his pocket. He touched the note. Then he waited. Steve moved down the line. He shook Noah's hand. Noah looked up at him. "Misty, Steve?" Steve smiled. "What's up, young man?" Noah pulled out the folded paper. "This is for you." Steve took it. "Is this a secret?" Noah nodded. Steve smiled. "Okay, I'll read it." He unfolded the paper. The smile disappeared. He read it once, then again. The studio noise seemed to disappear around him. The paper said, "Please don't tell my mum. I know she's dying." Steve looked at Noah. The boy's eyes were fixed on him. Steve lowered the note. "Who told you this?" Noah whispered. "I heard them." Steve looked towards Sarah. She was still smiling. She had no idea. Steve's jaw tightened. He slowly put the note on the podium. The studio fell completely silent. He took off his glasses. He looked at Noah, then at Sarah, then back at Noah. "Does your mama know you know?" Noah shook his head. Steve nodded slowly. "Okay," he walked towards Sarah. She smiled. "What happened?" Steve didn't answer. He looked at her. Then he looked down at the note. Sarah's face changed. She knew. Noah immediately looked at the floor. Sarah covered her mouth. Steve stepped between them. "Hold on." The audience didn't move. Steve turned toward the producer. "Stop!" A producer spoke into a headset. Steve shook his head. "No, stop everything." The studio fell completely silent. Steve looked at the cameras. "Cut the game." Sarah whispered, "Steve, I'm sorry." Steve turned toward her. "Don't apologize." She started crying. Steve walked closer. "How long?" Sarah looked down. 8 months. "What is brain cancer?" Steve's face tightened. "How old are you?" 43. Steve looked at Noah, then at Sarah. Then he said quietly, 43 is too young. Sarah nodded. I know. Noah was crying now. Steve walked over to him. He crouched down. Come here. Noah stepped forward. Steve wrapped one arm around him. Noah whispered, I don't want her to go. Steve closed his eyes. He held the boy for several seconds. Then he stood. The room held its breath. Steve looked at Sarah. You've been carrying this by yourself? She nodded. I didn't want my kids to be scared. Steve shook his head. They're already scared. Sarah began crying harder. Steve reached for her hand. You don't have to hide it from them anymore. Then he looked at Noah. Your mama is sick. Noah nodded. But sick isn't the same as gone. Noah wiped his eyes. Steve looked toward the camera. I want everybody watching at home to understand what just happened. He held up the note. This little boy didn't come here asking for money. He looked at Noah. He came here asking me to protect his mother from the truth. Steve paused. And that is a burden no 8-year-old should ever carry. The audience began crying. Steve put the note down. Then he said, Let me tell you something. He explained that there had been times in his own life when he had been afraid, times when he didn't know where his next meal would come from, times when he slept in his car, times when he wondered whether life was ever going to change. I know what it feels like to have a problem bigger than you. He looked at Noah. But you don't have to solve this one. Noah nodded. Steve looked at Sarah, and you don't have to pretend you're okay every minute. Sarah wiped her face. I don't know how to do anything else. Steve smiled sadly. Then we'll learn together. He turned toward the producer. I need a phone. A producer handed him his phone. Steve shook his head. No, mine. He pulled his own phone from his pocket. The audience watched. Steve dialed. Robert? He waited. I'm on set. Pause. I need help for a family. He looked at Sarah. Brain cancer. 43 years old. 2 children. He listened. I need $75,000 put aside today. Sarah immediately shook her head. No, Steve. He covered the phone. Let me do this. He returned to the call. And I need a medical advocate. Somebody who can go through every bill, every insurance issue, every treatment option. Pause. No, I don't want them signing anything today. I just want somebody helping them understand their choices. He ended the call. The audience applauded. Steve raised his hand. That's not a prize. He looked at Sarah. That is help. Then he turned toward the other family. I need to ask you something. The opposing family stood. Their captain, David, looked at Steve. Steve explained what had happened. David looked toward Sarah. Then he looked at his family. We'll give up the game. Steve shook his head. No, David insisted. We're not taking the money. Steve smiled. You came here to play. David walked across the stage. He hugged Sarah. We're praying for you. Sarah cried. Steve looked at the audience. This is why we don't stop believing in people. Then Steve made another announcement. Both families are getting the prize. The studio erupted. Noah looked confused. Steve smiled at him. You know what? Noah shook his head. You're the bravest person in this room. Noah looked at his mother. Steve continued. But you don't have to be brave anymore. The words hit Sarah. She bent forward. Steve walked over. He held her hand. He didn't give a speech. He didn't make a joke. He simply stood there, holding her hand. The cameras were still rolling. But nobody was thinking about television anymore. A crew member behind camera 2 wiped his eyes. Another producer turned away. The studio fell completely silent. After almost a minute, Steve finally spoke. We're not cancelling because your story isn't worth telling. He looked towards Sarah. We're cancelling because your family needs this moment more than we need another episode. Sarah nodded. The game ended that day. There was no final score, no winner, no loser, just a folded piece of paper sitting on Steve Harvey's podium. 3 weeks later, the episode aired. The network introduced it simply as a special family moment. The clip of Noah handing Steve the note reached 9 million views in its first day. By the end of the week, it had passed 41 million. Then, the hashtag appeared. 7 Words people began sharing stories about children who had carried adult problems silently. Parents posted messages, teachers posted messages, doctors posted messages. The note became a symbol. 7 words, 1 child, 1 truth. 3 months later, Sarah had started a new treatment plan. It wasn't easy. There were hospital visits. There were bad days. There were mornings when she couldn't get out of bed. But the family stopped pretending. Noah could ask questions. Madison could cry. Sarah could say, "Today is a hard day." Nobody had to say "I'm fine" anymore. 6 months later, Noah's teacher noticed something. He was sleeping better. He was talking more. He wasn't checking his mother's face every few minutes anymore. 1 year after the taping, Sarah was still receiving treatment. Her doctors remained cautious. But she was home. She attended Noah's school concert. She sat in the front row. Noah looked at her from the stage. She gave him a thumbs up. He smiled. After the concert, he ran to her. "You stayed." Sarah hugged him. "I told you I would." Noah smiled. 2 years after the Family Feud taping, the family created a small program called 7 Words, helping families explain serious illness to children in age-appropriate ways. Its motto was simple: children deserve truth without carrying the burden. The program's first year helped 312 families. By its third year, more than 2,400 families had received counselling resources, support materials, or financial assistance. And Sarah kept the original hospital papers, medical bills, and photographs. But Noah kept something else: the blue crayon note. He had asked Steve for it. Steve had given him a copy. The original stayed with the family. It was framed, not because they wanted to remember the fear, because they wanted to remember the moment Noah finally stopped carrying it alone. 5 years later, Steve received a letter. It was from Noah. He was 13. The letter said, "Mr. Steve, you told me I didn't have to solve it." "I didn't. Mum is still here." "Thank you." Steve read the letter twice. Then he called Sarah. She answered. Steve asked about Noah. "He's taller than me now," she said. Steve laughed. "That's what happens." Sarah laughed too. Then Steve asked how she was doing. Sarah paused. "I'm here." Steve smiled. "That sounds pretty good to me." Today, the blue crayon note is still in Noah's room. The handwriting is uneven. The letters are too large. There are places where the crayon pressed so hard into the paper that it almost tore through. 7 words: a child's secret, a mother's fear, and a television host who decided that for one afternoon, a game show could wait. Because sometimes the most important thing a person can say is not spoken into a microphone. Sometimes it is written on a piece of notebook paper and handed quietly to someone who might finally understand. Noah thought he was asking Steve Harvey not to tell his mother that he knew. What he was really asking was much simpler. He was asking an adult to help him carry something that had become too heavy for a child. And Steve did. He didn't fix everything. He couldn't promise tomorrow. He couldn't erase the diagnosis. But he could hold the boy's hand. He could hold his mother's hand. And he could remind an entire room that children should never have to become adults just because life became frightening. Sometimes compassion doesn't look like a speech. Sometimes it looks like putting down the cards, stopping the game, and holding someone's hand until they remember they aren't alone. If this story about Noah's 7-word note touched your heart, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that children should never have to carry adult pain alone. Have you ever been a child who understood something the adults thought they were hiding? Or have you ever had to protect a child from a difficult truth? Tell us your story in the comments, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more stories that remind us what kindness can do.